Thank you for joining this episode of 805 Talk, a show about what's happening inside the 805, with a focus on the Simi Valley and Conejo Valley communities. We bring you everything local business owners, nonprofit organizations, government officials, community leaders, and real estate. Here's our host, Jeff Landau.
Hello, thank you for joining us. Jeff Landau here with Team 805 Real Estate and Keller Williams, and I am very, very excited to be discussing a topic that I'm really passionate about, and have the amazing fortune to have either the top person or one of the top people in the entire country to share information with us. And I am talking about Chase Magnuson. And although Chase would probably be very happy to toot his horn, I'll do it for him. He is president of Real Estate for Charities, has a long history in land development, sales, leasing, and property management, and is one of the top gifting professionals in the nation. In addition to founding Real Estate for Charities, he's the co-author of The Secret Power Behind Real Estate Donations, which came out in 2014. And last year, he came out with his second book, Real Estate Donations, 47 Critical Questions. He's been a contributor to articles in Forbes, Wall Street Journal, New York Times. He's a well-known national speaker on charitable giving real estate, and is also the co-founder of Realty Gift Fund, and serves as its chief financial officer. Welcome, Chase. Thank you very, very much for joining us.
Thanks, Jeff. Looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, today, I want us to eventually dive into simultaneous closings and how that can work for nonprofits. It addresses any concerns that they have about staffing needs to accept gifts of real estate, and also addresses any kind of concerns that they may have of any risks involved in accepting gifts of real estate. Before getting to that, if you could just share, as far as real estate gifts for charities, what kind of trends are you seeing? What kind of real estate are you seeing that is being donated to nonprofits right now?
Well, let me characterize the area as being a case where charities in the real estate industry are actually crashing into each other. Investors who have made multiple exchanges and now find themselves at the end of their investment period want to figure out the best ways to maximize the profits they've made over the years, and also to be philanthropists and use a portion of that profit to fund their favorable charities. So the gamut on the types of real estate runs everything from farm and ranches to shopping centers, warehousing complexes. The biggest area is single family residential. That might take between 60 and 75% of all gifts of real estate to charities across the country come in the form of single family homes, be it a condominium or a house, townhouse, that sort of thing, characterized as single family residential. The trend is that with only 14% of the national wealth held in cash and 44% of the national wealth held in real estate, charities have always been trying to get cash or stocks or bonds, which are very liquid and they can manage, but they're finding the demands for their charitable missions are requiring them to be creative and go out and look for other assets. And here sits the biggest elephant in the room, real estate, and they're trying to figure out how to deal with that. So that's what's going on out in the marketplace. There's roughly $4 billion a year in real estate actually works its way through the process at this point. But there's another 16 billion that charities reject because of, as you mentioned, risk factors and holding costs and the other things the boards of directors are concerned with. So we're addressing those issues at this time.
So if I can get that number straight, roughly $4 billion of real estate is getting donated to charities throughout the country, and roughly 16 billion is getting rejected.
That's correct. That's on our last survey on in the area of what the IRS is reporting and what charities are indicating across the country. Yeah, that's a mind-blowing number. I figure 80% of all gifts of real estate are rejected out of hands by the charities.
I was just wrapping my head around that and couldn't even form words. So thank you for taking over. That's incredible.
Yeah, and those that work their way through the process, the average benefit to the charity is around $425,000 per gift. So you're looking at some really major opportunities for charities to grab 1, 2, or more pieces of real estate a year that could fund their organization, even though it could be a small organization.
That's incredible. And that 425,000 average, I mean, think about what good that would do for the country, and just that the gap that charities fill and fulfill between the private and public sector. That is a dramatic number. And I've volunteered in the development offices of a couple of nonprofits, and it was frustrating to me to try to get them thinking about real estate, and their focus is on major gifts and getting somebody to go from a $50 gift to a $100 gift to a $200 gift over the course of years. And it's extremely noble. It's very tangible. And to me, it was frustrating because it was so natural to think inside the box and not even get close to the edges. So hopefully today we'll be sharing some information that gets development officers and board members excited to explore this opportunity and hopefully start attracting some gifts of real estate to their charities and their nonprofits. You've probably seen charities turning down gifts. Is the biggest reason because they don't even have a gift acceptance policy of real estate, or is it there's just too much risk involved in just even the holding time and the carrying costs?
Most charities have boards of directors and stratified reporting systems through chief financial officers, general counsel, the fundraiser who is out there asking for these gifts or being offered them. Quite often, a real estate gift will come out of the blue and it comes to the gift officer. And then if they don't have a policies and procedure in place and they want to take the gift, it takes too long to work that process out to put it in place. I like to characterize as one of my Chase-isms is that real estate donations are, they're perishable. That a donor that says, I want to give you my $1 million house because I'm solving other problems, doesn't want to wait for 6 months for a charity to put together the pieces to say, yes, we'll take it. And this quite often happens. The donor either goes to another charity that will accept it, or they'd say, I'm giving up on the charities and I'll sell the property, pay my taxes and move on. And those are sort of the issues that are faced. So charities need to be in a position to actually accept real estate or have some sort of minimal procedure in which they can quickly vet the property.
That's fantastic feedback, because I would imagine that you run into charities that say, you know what, why don't you bring us a gift and we'll see if it's a good one. And then if it's a good one, then we'll start thinking about how we can possibly accept it. Then they run into that problem that you just mentioned.
Well, and overlay that with most of the procedures that I have seen over the years I've been doing this is that they request from the donor to get an appraisal and get an environmental impact study, get a radon report and everything else. So here's a donor that says, here, I'm trying to give you $1 million. Not only won't you take it outright, you're asking me to start expending money and environmental reports, title work, everything else. You're looking at maybe 6 months before the charity's in a position to meet their board of directors procedures to accept the property. unacceptable for the most philanthropic donor you're ever going to have. But that's how it works within the charitable world. That's why donors come and go and say, my church won't take a property, my college won't take it, and that sort of thing. It's very, very strange, and it needs to change.
And so this is where the simultaneous closing that is the focus of this podcast. The simultaneous closing addresses any kind of risk that a charity could face by accepting a gift. Is that right?
That's correct. The
Okay.
only risk that the charity has, that they have on any gift, is how they accept the property from the donor, report to the IRS, and the appraisal requirements that the donor has. That is a risk in any gift on reporting, but that is so small in comparison to real estate ownership that it's to say it's virtually risk-free is a true statement.
So what would be the biggest risk that a charity takes in facilitating a simultaneous closing?
Well, I think we ought to define a simultaneous closing before I go into the process.
There you go.
I use the term simultaneous closing, which virtually mirrors what goes on with Section 1031 exchanging, where there is a pooled closing where several parties go to escrow and each come out with different deeds, cash, and everything else. So that's in the exchange, tax deferred exchange world. 1031 exchanges are very familiar with pooled escrow transactions, which are virtually simultaneous closings. A simultaneous closing would occur in the following fashion. The donor offers the charity a piece of property, free and clear in this example. The charity and the donor enter into a contract that gives the charity two options. Number one, the option is they can accept the property and take title to it. Or secondly, they can take control of the property in an equity position under the donation contract and the charity has to go find the buyer. And when they find the buyer at an acceptable price, they direct the donor at closing to deed not to the charity, but to the third-party buyer. So you don't have sequential deeding in two transactions. Most charities use the process in which the donor deeds the property to the charity first, then the charity deeds the property to an eventual buyer. Once the charity's in the chain of title, they have environmental impact issues, they have closing costs. For the fundraisers who find these wonderful properties, they get tied up in months and months of checks on what's going on with the transaction. They try to become real estate experts, and it just doesn't work well. So by using a simultaneous closing, the charity's never in the chain of title, they have no holding costs, and if they don't find an acceptable buyer within 120 days or 180 days, they can cancel the donation agreement. The donors put back in the same position they were before they tried to make this arrangement. But if the charity is successful, they're not really dealing in real estate equities. They're only dealing in cash, because remember, they go to closing with the buyer and the title company sends the charity the net proceeds from the sale, and the donor has completed his gifting arrangement, which is the most sophisticated and streamlined way for charities, even small charities with a single fundraiser or a single board member that runs across a property. They come out and hire you as their consultant, Jeff, and you manage hiring realtors, finding title insurance companies, and everything else at no cost. And what you should also be hearing is you're not making a requirement on the donor to spend any money up front. They don't have to. What most charities don't understand is when you get an environmental report that they're requiring the donor to get, that it's no good for you. You can look at it, but if the environmental engineer misses something, the third-party buyer can't use the original environmental impact study to provide protection. They have to hire their own environmental engineering firm anyway that is then committed to protect the third party buyer. So getting a $7,500 or $15,000 or $25,000 environmental impact up front that's not terribly usable is avoided by doing a simultaneous closing. It's the same for surveys and everything else.
And this arrangement, I would imagine, this simultaneous closing has been around for a very long time. This isn't something that just came out.
There are actually two tax cases on this going back to the early 1980s, and there are tax court of appeal cases, and major universities and major charities across the country use this on a regular basis to fund charitable gift annuities, outright sales, and bargain sales. It's a very pliable way to have charities now ask for real estate, and when they get it, be prepared to move quickly. The front end due diligence and everything else can take as little as a couple of weeks. A donation contract can be signed. The donors are happy that it's moving forward, and the charity controls the property to list it, negotiate with the buyer, and pick a closing date.
One thing you had mentioned, you were giving an example of a property that's free and clear. Does a property need to be free and clear, or can it be encumbered in this situation?
It can be encumbered. If a property, let's say it's $1 million house and it's got a $250,000 mortgage on it, the charity can enter into a donation agreement taking the property subject to the $250,000 mortgage. When the charity finds a buyer that's going to give them $1 million in cash at closing, the charity uses $250,000 of the purchase money cash to pay off the mortgage, and they pocket the other $750,000. They've never gone into title, and they've not ever had to deal with something called unrelated business income tax when you are dealing with debt encumbered property. But Jeff, the other side of that coin is if the donor says, I'd love to give you my $1 million property, but I'd like to have $400,000 in cash, the same process works. You can enter into a contract agreeing to pay the donor $400,000 upon the sale of the property. At the end, you get a buyer for $1 million. The title company splits the funding. The donor gets part of the money, and the charity gets part of the money.
Win, win, win. Wow.
It is, and the reason the IRS and the appellate courts have accepted this is that in some states in the East, there is as much as an 8% transfer fee on each transfer of property. So if you've got $1 million property and you do sequential deeding rather than simultaneous closings, it'll cost the charity an extra $80,000 in that gifting arrangement. And the IRS and the tax courts realize that doesn't benefit the charities. So there's no reason to have sequential deeding and two closings. By doing one, the charity only pays one transfer tax. And in some cases, they can avoid the transfer tax because they're a 501c3.
Wow. And this is amazing that it also addresses the encumbrance issues, because that I think holds back some charities also when a property has a mortgage on it.
There very, very few charities have got discretionary funds to write a check for $400,000. They're just not set up to do, and it would take major action by the board to approve that, and some boards only meet quarterly. So again, you're facing the timing issue and the perishability of the gifting arrangement if you don't understand a simultaneous closing gets everybody where they want to be. And it's a wonderful opportunity for real estate brokers who have the knowledge to understand how these pieces go together from the donor side, the charity side, and how professionally you handle a closing to avoid issues.
And can this work with a 1031, or were you using that as an example?
I was only using
okay.
1031 because the pooling portion where you go into escrow with 1, 2, 3, or as many as 10 properties, you don't have all of the deeds going sequentially. And so with the donation coming in and the buyer coming in with the charity as the beneficiary of the closing, it's the simplest way to close it.
Sure, and now that I'm thinking about it, that the 1031 is a perfect example, because you could look at the property owner as the charity, where they don't touch the proceeds. The proceeds goes to the accommodator, and then
Yes.
and then it goes to the seller. So that's I mean, yeah. So that's a great example. So would it sounds like a charity doesn't even need to be set up in a certain way as far as any kind of staffing, other than having a procedure to facilitate this, and to also have the education, so that when this opportunity comes up, first of all, these opportunities probably come up, but since they're not thinking about real estate, it goes in one ear and out the other, because they're looking for a different kind of gift. So just having this knowledge is going to be helpful. And then having the charity understand the minimal amount of structure that is needed is going to help them be motivated to be thinking about these gifts.
You're right on, Jeff, because fundraisers and their legal counsel, whether it's in-house or exterior legal counsel, all deal with contracts every day. And all we're talking about is contract law here, where an attorney writes the donation agreement, spelling out the terms of what the property is, if there's any debt on it, and that it's going to a qualified 501c3. That document controls everything else that goes on. And it's a very simple real estate transaction from that point forward. And the realtor that's involved is the consultant to help work with the fundraiser and the small or large charity is worth their weight in gold, because we're all used to solving problems, and I've not run across a real estate transaction in my career that hasn't had at least one problem, minor or major, and that could absolutely derail a gift that should have gone through if the liquidation of the property is left to in-house counsel, who's not a real estate expert, or the fundraiser, who's not done anything more than buy or sell a home or a lot or something like that. We're really talking about somebody who has had years and years of experience solving problems, such as what you've been doing in your career and with your network across the area. And that's why I'm so excited that we're sort of talking about this area and expanding it to charities in your locale.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's say we have a executive director of a charity, whatever the size is. Let's maybe think about a small charity, or a board member is listening to this. Can you please explain to them what they ultimately need in place in order to make this work for them, to have them think about real estate gifts in general, and maybe what they do need and even what they don't need? Because there's probably like the overwhelm of the gift and the attorneys and the contracts, and it sounds very, very complicated, even though they aren't thinking about the $425,000 average gift out there.
They need, first of all, to have an attorney that's very familiar with real estate and charitable law, so that can draft the contract for this donation. Once they've got that, it would be turned over to an internal person, whether it's the fundraiser, to follow the terms of the contract, or it's a chief financial officer. But they need the mechanism for approval and for somebody to sign with authority for the organization. And that would take a corporate resolution from the board of directors saying that Ms. Smith and Harry Jones have authorization to sign on behalf of the charity. So they sign the contract for donation. They sign the contract for listing the property to sell it. They sign the purchase agreement and the escrow instructions when the deal is closing. So it could be done by one person, but since you have a fundraiser or a board of director who has located the gift, they can play in that role. And we're not talking about hours and hours of time commitment. We're talking a half an hour to read the contract, a half an hour to look at closing statements. But again, their real estate consultant is there at every step of the way to help them walk through it. Normally, real estate consultants are put on sort of a retainer to stand by if something comes along. It can be a very minimal amount. Then they charge by the hour to marshal this through. But if you're talking about a $420,000 benefit and a few $1,000s over a period of a couple of months for a consultant to make sure that the realtor's doing everything they should do, holding the hand of the charity and having a successful gift, it is very, very minor when you're looking at generally the cost of selling a piece of real estate, title work, taxes, everything else. About 10% of the value of the property for real estate commissions, title insurance, prorations on taxes, and that sort of thing. So the consultant is just a small cost in all of that, but very important. So that piece needs to be in place. You're right, there should at least be a bare bones procedure on what the charity requires when they're considering a piece of real estate. Now, remember, on a simultaneous closing, they've got a choice, and it's required to meet the requirements for the charitable deduction that the charity can either take the property or they can do a simultaneous closing. My recommendation always is to do the simultaneous closing, but there may be cases where the property clearly is valuable at $1 million and you've come to the end of your due diligence period and the donor said either take the property or I'm going somewhere else. So there may be a case where you would want to take the property, especially if the charity could use it for whatever their mission is. That's a whole nother area.
Okay. And it seems like from a staffing need, instead of staffing, they can have a consultant involved. And while they may want to find a attorney that is versed in real estate and also charitable giving and charitable law, that's something that can be brought to the nonprofit basically as a package, that we have this available and you can go do it on your own. And if you don't have any interest in doing it on your own, we, the consultant can bring that expertise to the nonprofit, so they don't have to staff up. They don't have to go find an attorney, and maybe they have to interview 3 attorneys and who has the knowledge, and then
Exactly.
go through all of that.
Exactly. And by getting a consultant available, you may not call on that consultant for 3 months, 6 months, or a year, but the pipeline has begun. And, on a Sunday afternoon that you're golfing with somebody as a fundraiser, and they'd say to your playing partner, he says, we've got this cabin in North Carolina that nobody wants to go to anymore. Would your charity be interested in that? Well, by Friday of the following week, you ought to have that donation under contract, and then the charity controls it for the next 4 months to see what they've got. It could be a $10,000 cabin, or it could be $1 million cabin. You never know.
And that's what's so amazing about this, because you could have the smallest of charity wherever it's located. And, in this example, there could be a property on the other side of the country, and that conversation would go in one ear, out the other, and then they would walk from the 7th to the 8th hole and never think about it again, and may have just given up $1 million without even knowing it.
Exactly. Just a quick story.
Please.
I know you've got a lot of questions, but an example of this, I was playing at La Costa one day when I was living in Southern California, and one of the people that joined my foursome after 3 or 4 holes asked what I did, and I said, I handle real estate for charities. He said, well, I'm the CFO of a hospital in Amarillo that we'd like to give to you. We'd like to get $3 million back out of it, but it was a $20 million gift. So when I use talking to somebody on the golf course on a Sunday afternoon, I've had that experience. And the fundraisers are meeting all sorts of wonderful people who are all philanthropically inclined, but they never ask the question, do you know our charity takes real estate? That's all they have to say.
I think this really comes down to, or at least the way that I think about it from a fundraising standpoint, I call it, arrows in the quiver, right? Like if you don't have a branded credit card for your nonprofit, you're not going to mention it to anybody. If you don't accept gifts of real estate, you're not going to mention it. You're not going to think about it. You're not going to offer it. Your radar's not going to be up. So this, so it sounds like this really all starts with education to the individual nonprofits, to the fundraisers, to the board, to the executive directors, making them all aware that this is possible. This is either, let's not say no risk, but probably the smallest risk possible, where they can get transformational gifts.
Absolutely. It's the message, and it's easy to get to every staff member, every janitor that works at your university, school, or whatever, who's been saving for years and years and have seen what the students have done. And they may make a $50,000 cash contribution to a small private school, but they may also give them their farm that's worth many hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they're in a position to say, I'll give you your farm if you'll give me a long-term life income in the form of a charitable gift annuity payment. So there's ways to have income off of the gift or cash. So it's a mix and match. There's
just so many different possibilities for this, and does the simultaneous closing not address any, let me word it differently. My mind's racing. Is there an objection that you heard that the simultaneous closing does not address?
I've heard the objections. A lot of their attorneys that are not familiar with it, even though they read the case law on it, are more inclined to say, no, we won't allow our client to do it because our client's not going to get a charitable deduction. That's the fear from a donor's attorney that looks at a donation agreement that gives the option of a simultaneous closing that they've never heard of before. So they're more inclined to say, no, we're not going to do that. When we hear that objection, we have attorneys that are standing by that have closed these transactions across the country that have a conversation that don't threaten the donor's attorney for not having knowledge on this particular type of transaction, that the donor is trying to make a gift, and the attorney is saying, oh no, you may lose your deduction because I've never heard of a simultaneous closing, and I don't know that the tax law is fixed on that. You need somebody on the charity side that calls and has the conversation and said, we just did one in Seattle, we did here. And the question is, how many times have you been audited? And over 26 years, I've only had one corporation on a corporate gift be audited on it. And the simultaneous closing stood up on a major manufacturing plant that we did.
Okay,
so that's what you're faced with that could make it not work.
Okay, so that's a big objection from the donor side.
Don't exactly.
Have you come across gift opportunities? You mentioned the simultaneous closing, and you get an objection from the charity side?
Every time.
What are the common ones?
They don't know.
Right.
You come in and you'd say, I'm selling elephants today, and they think that they only buy giraffes, so they're not buying any elephants. It takes an educational meeting with whoever is an authority at the charity to sort of walk through it, and they can turn to their attorneys and say, look at this and tell us that it's okay. But right now we're saying no until we know more. And so there's a one or two more meetings. And again, the charity's attorney that's not steeped in this area is going to call an outside attorney that does it on a regular basis, that says, no, this is perfectly okay.
So from the charity side, a lot of it, or it all starts from education.
Yes.
Okay.
It's the fear of the unknown, and it sounds too good to be true. And as we all know, people are afraid of that sort of thing, but we've overcome it over the years.
Well, and so let alone people naturally having a fear of the unknown, then you put on top of that charity that really wants to play inside the box and not take any risks.
Their staff does not look on these transactions as career enhancing moves. If they step on a landmine and one of these go badly, their career with that organization and maybe many others are gone to them. So they're extremely cautious.
That first time is always the one that's most nerve-wracking, right?
Right.
Have you seen any community foundations pick this up and start spreading this from an educational standpoint, or for their own gifting?
I worked quite a bit with the San Diego Community Foundation, and they were reluctant to use this. Remember, the community foundations are one step removed from the donors in many cases. It might be a united way that brings the donor to the community foundation, and the community foundation doesn't have the same relationship with the donor. So the donor and the community foundation doesn't want to try and remake the wheel. So they're not going to step out of their very, very stringent requirements, appraisals, environmental issues. The donor pays for it all. Yes, we'll take it if you twist our arm, but we really don't want to do it.
Please stop giving this gift.
Yes, don't give us $1 million. We couldn't possibly do anything with that.
Well, I'm hoping that this podcast starts the educational process and raising eyebrows for people within charities and even their advisors. Maybe we're going to reach an attorney that realizes this is a great opportunity, and they can start spreading this word. As far as the actual gift goes, you mentioned the charitable gift annuity, the bargain sale, and just an outright gift.
Yes.
Are those going to be like the three most common ways or gifts that are generated through the simultaneous closing?
Yes, because in the case of a charitable remainder trust, the property has to be donated into the trust, but the charity is only the remainderman, and it is the trustee that sells the property. So the charity is not at any risk, but they are on gift annuities, bargain sales, and outright gifts.
Okay, so then we as advisors need to make sure that the development officers are at least knowledgeable enough about a charitable gift annuity and a bargain sale just from a functional standpoint, but really it's really just begging them to keep their ears open for this real estate gift opportunity. And maybe that next contact is simply saying to the donor, can I set up a Zoom call or a meeting and introduce an opportunity to you?
Yes,
and then
exactly.
Yeah. I hope I didn't ask this, and I'm going to ask it again. From the donor standpoint, like the odds of a donor hearing, if a development officer says, here's this opportunity, if they mention the words simultaneous closing, a donor's going to have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. Is that going to be like the biggest stumbling block for a donor? Just the confusion around how do you even make a gift of real estate if it's the first time that they may be doing that?
I would say that's not an appropriate subject for the fundraiser and the donor to have on the initial meetings or anything else up to the time the donation contract is presented to the donor with an explanation on the two options that the charity has. That's the time for the donor to have the information they can take to their attorney and say, the Boys and Girls Club of Monterey have said that they're interested in taking my property. They've given me a contract and they've got one of the provisions in it that the fundraiser says that you need to take a look at it. It's a particular way that the Monterey Boys and Girls Club can avoid risks on real estate. It's a common in the industry, but I need your approval, Mr. Attorney, that says this is okay if I want to claim a charitable deduction. So that the fundraiser is the last person in the world that ought to be having a discussion on something like a simultaneous closing with all of the variations that a donor could ask. And if the fundraiser can't answer those questions on that interview, it's going sideways.
Right. So did you just feel that big sigh of relief from everybody listening to this, that they don't have to go through that education
Oh,
process?
no, and they shouldn't. No, these donations are not business transactions. These are legacy gifts by somebody that wants to support your organization. They're going to be pliable once you explain why, while somebody explains why the charity's not going into title and why they're not going to take it the day after tomorrow. They need a little time.
So what we really need to make this work is for the charity to be open to this, discuss at least a procedure that they should be thinking about, and then just having them keep their ears open. And then whenever they either ask for or hear about the possibility of a real estate gift, then that's when they would get, if they're not properly staffed for it, and then that's when they would bring in the consultant.
Real estate consultant, yes.
And just have this initial conversation and see how it lands with the donor.
Exactly. And the fact that the charity was prepared to have a knowledgeable real estate consultant speak to the donor before the donor takes it to his attorney, and then being able to speak to the attorney and provide memos with the case studies the attorney doesn't have to spend hours and hours to find is a fast way to make everybody feel comfortable that this
Awesome.
is a normal arrangement.
Perfect. I'm sure we could extend this to about 2-hour conversation with you and I love speaking with you. Is there anything else that you feel I may have left out, or something, something or some things that would be good to share with anybody listening who could be a consultant to nonprofits, an attorney for nonprofits, a board member, a development officer, the executive director? Is anything else that I may have left out that we should make sure that they understand or know about?
The message is that real estate is an ideal gifting arrangement for most people because it can be bifurcated by paying off mortgages or giving money to the donors to facilitate a mission that they're really supporting in the way of gifts, that it isn't smoke and mirrors, that there are people doing this across the country and the volume of gifting of real estate is ballooning. So for charities, they need to ask for it, or at least make people aware. For the real estate consultants that understand this, they ought to be talking to the charities that spend their money to go out and find investment advisors and estate planning attorneys to think of them when their clients are going to do real estate. And another side adventure with this is that a charity that it does a couple of these might actually become a lead charity with another organization that doesn't have the expertise, and they split the donation, even though the donor never had any interest in the Boys and Girls Club of Monterey or the Sea Turtles evacuation in North Carolina. Those charities, if they take real estate, can actually put themselves out as a facilitating charity.
Interesting. And you just mentioned estate planning attorneys, and for some reason I wasn't even thinking about that specialty of attorney, do you see these gifts starting not necessarily with the charity, but starting with the estate planning attorney who may either be creating somebody's estate plan or maybe updating it?
Estate planning attorneys are astute in listening to what their clients want. If the clients don't know that they can use real estate in gifting, the estate attorney is not going to go out on the edge and say, oh, you might, instead of giving cash to the Girl Scouts, you might want to give them your property that you paid $10,000 for that's worth $400,000 now. That would be better than writing them an after-tax check for $500,000. The estate planning attorneys do lots of wonderful things, but it is the donors that have to go in and say, I want to give this property to the Girl Scouts. How do we do it?
And then having the tool of a charitable gift annuity still allows the donor to get some income coming in.
Yes, but right now gift annuities are not in vogue because the rates on the gift annuities are so low that a charitable remainder trust where you can negotiate the interest rate on the trust is a much better way. And that's where real estate is going if they're looking for an income stream, because it can be negotiated at 5, 6, 7, 8%, as compared to 1.5 to 3% on a gift annuity.
Okay. Could I trouble you to summarize the risks, even though they are minimal, if you could summarize the risks to a charity if they do engage in a simultaneous closing, just in case we've engaged somebody and this is sounding good, but they still have at the back of their head, we don't really want, we're not in the risk business. So would you mind doing that one more time for us?
It's hard to define what the risk for the charity is. The risk is how their fundraiser portrayed the gifting arrangement to the donor. And that's always a risk that a charity takes when the decision-making body is one step away from the person that has been at somebody's home explaining how this goes. What it says on the document and what the fundraiser understood the gifting arrangement were and how they've talked to their donor is a risk all charities have to consider. It might be done because the fundraising specialist is over exuberant or doesn't understand quite what happens, and the transaction closes and the donor, for whatever reason, said, oh, I thought I was getting A and what you're giving me is B. And I don't like that. And that's the risk. So there's communications once the contract's put in place, a follow-up memo that says, we've talked about this and this is what I've explained you to do. And here's the contract, and portraying what we think we've agreed to. And that memo goes in the file along with the contract. So the donor can never say, Mrs. Smith, when she came to my house, said I was going to get this, and I'm not getting that. And so I don't like it. And I want to roll back the donation. That's the risk that I see. The charity is not in the chain of title. So all of the guarantees for histories on people who have died in a house or an oil tank that wasn't discovered for whatever reason, the charity's not involved in that. That comes from the original donor who didn't disclose. So that's the kind of thing that you avoid by never being in the chain of title and having a covering memo on what the fundraiser talked to the donor about.
So it sounds like really the only risk is not effective communication with the donor, which really comes with a lot of different gifts to the charity, not only real estate or a simultaneous closing.
Yes, and of course, that comes out mostly where the charities don't use the money the way the donor thought it was going to be used and the way it was portrayed. And that's one of the black eyes that charities have. You name a building and 2 years later you put another name on it and the children say that wasn't the deal.
Right.
So It is not a scary world. It is wonderful. It is exploding, and we need more people like you in it, Jeff. And that's why I'm taking my time with you.
I appreciate that, Chase. And yeah, just you mentioned how much cash is out there, how much real estate is out there, and how much real estate that could be gifted isn't gifted, which hopefully, like you said, somebody could be listening to this and say, wow, that scares us, if they want to look at it that way. And they can look at the exact same conversation that you and I just had and be really excited about. I didn't realize there was a way to accept a gift of real estate without taking any risk and without staffing up for it. How do we get started? So really, really appreciate your time, really value your expertise and your interest in sharing your wealth of knowledge with us. And hopefully this is going to be a vehicle for raising more gifts of real estate to charities throughout the country.
Well, best of luck to you and those that are listening to this. Seize the opportunity and at least try. That would be my recommendation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chase.
Okay. Thank you.
Right, okay. Enjoyed it. If you do have any questions about real estate, please reach out. You can reach me by phone at 805-341-0398, or you can find me on my website as well at jefflandauhomes.com. As always, thanks so much for listening.
Thank you for listening to my daddy's podcast.